The rain poured heavily that night, drumming against the windows of the small cafe where Nnamdi sat nervously, his fingers wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea. The room was dimly lit, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and burnt coffee. It was supposed to be just another meeting, one of many he'd had since graduating from university, trying to pitch his big ideas to investors who never seemed to take him seriously. But this time, something was different. The man sitting across from him was Alhaji Abdul Qadir, one of the most enigmatic tycoons in the country. Stories of his success were whispered in hushed tones, a man who had risen from nothing to control a vast empire of industries, from oil and gas to real estate. Some said he was ruthless, others called him a genius. But everyone agreed on one thing: if Alhaji took an interest in you, your life was about to change. Nnamdi cleared his throat. Sir, as I was saying, the agricultural tech platform I'm developing could transform the way farmers access markets. With the right funding, we can... Alhaji raised a hand, silencing him. His piercing eyes seemed to see right through Nnamdi. You are ambitious, he said finally, his voice deep and commanding. But ambition without power is like a ship without a rudder. Nnamdi frowned. I don't understand, sir. You will, Alhaji replied, a faint smile playing on his lips. I see potential in you, Nnamdi, but to truly succeed you must be willing to take risks, big risks. Are you? Nnamdi hesitated. This was the moment he had been waiting for, someone powerful enough to back his dreams, but something about the man's tone sent a shiver down his spine. Yes, sir, he said, his voice steady despite the unease creeping over him. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Alhaji leaned back, steepling his fingers. Good. Then I have an offer for you. It is not money that you need, but access, connections, influence. I can give you all of that and more. But... He paused, his smile fading. There is a price. Nnamdi swallowed hard. What kind of price? Success is not for the faint-hearted, Alhaji said cryptically. Come to my estate tomorrow night. We will discuss the details. Before Nnamdi could respond, Alhaji stood and walked out of the cafe, leaving behind an envelope. Inside was an invitation embossed in gold along with a single line, Greatness awaits those who dare to pay the price. The next evening, Nnamdi found himself standing before the gates of Alhaji's sprawling mansion. The estate was a testament to wealth and power, with its marble columns and meticulously manicured lawns. As he stepped inside, he was greeted by men in suits who escorted him to a grand dining hall. The room was filled with people, politicians, celebrities and business magnates, all of them laughing and toasting to their success. Alhaji appeared, dressed in an immaculate white agbada, and motioned for Nnamdi to follow him. They walked down a dimly lit corridor that seemed to stretch endlessly. At the end was a heavy oak door. Alhaji pushed it open, revealing a room unlike any Nnamdi had ever seen. The walls were lined with strange symbols, and in the center was a table covered with black velvet. On it sat a chalice filled with a dark liquid. The air was thick with an unplaceable tension. This, Alhaji said, gesturing to the room, is where men are made. Here you will pledge your loyalty and receive the power you seek. Nnamdi's heart raced. What do you mean? Alhaji's smile returned, colder this time. The world operates on principles, my boy. Power is never free. If you want to rise, you must be willing to sacrifice. As the words sank in, Nnamdi felt the weight of the moment. He was on the brink of everything he had ever dreamed of, but at what cost? The shadows in the room seemed to close in, and for the first time he realized he might be stepping into something far darker than he could have ever imagined. Nnamdi stood frozen, his eyes darting between the chalice and Alhaji's expectant gaze. The air seemed thicker now, suffocating and heavy with unspoken truths. Somewhere deep inside, his instincts screamed at him to run, but ambition whispered louder. What kind of sacrifice? Nnamdi finally asked, his voice shaky but firm. Alhaji chuckled, his laugh echoing in the strange room. Sacrifice comes in many forms, Nnamdi. Some give their time, others their loyalty. And then there are those willing to give everything. Nnamdi's chest tightened. I don't understand. What is in the chalice? Your initiation, Al-Haji said, stepping closer. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Drink from it, and you will be reborn. Your name will open doors no one dares to shut. But once you cross this line, there is no turning back. Nnamdi hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of his mother, who had struggled to send him to school, of the countless nights he had spent dreaming of a better life. This was his chance to escape mediocrity, to become someone important. But something about Al-Haji's tone, the way he spoke of sacrifice, sent a chill down his spine. What happens if I say no? Nnamdi asked, his voice barely audible. Al-Haji's expression darkened. Then you remain as you are, small, insignificant, forgotten. Men like you are plentiful, Nnamdi. But men like me, we are made, not born. The room seemed to pulse with a strange energy, the symbols on the walls glowing faintly. Nnamdi could feel the weight of the chalice calling to him, almost as if it were alive. He took a deep breath and stepped forward. If I do this, will anyone get hurt? Al-Haji's smile returned, though it didn't reach his eyes. The only one who will suffer is the weak version of yourself you leave behind. It wasn't the answer Nnamdi wanted, but it was the only one he was going to get. With trembling hands, he reached for the chalice. The liquid inside was dark and viscous, with an almost metallic sheen. As he brought it to his lips, 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. Was this the right choice? Could he live with himself if he walked away? He drank. The liquid was bitter, burning as it slid down his throat. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a searing pain erupted in his chest, spreading like fire through his veins. Nnamdi collapsed to the floor, clutching at his chest as the symbols on the walls blazed with light. He could hear voices, whispers that grew louder and louder until they were deafening. Rise, Nnamdi, Al-Haji's voice cut through the chaos. Rise and claim your destiny. The pain subsided as quickly as it had come, leaving Nnamdi gasping for air. When he opened his eyes, the room seemed different, sharper, clearer. He could see every detail, every crack in the walls, every flicker of the candles. What just happened? He managed to ask, his voice hoarse. You've taken the first step, Al-Haji said, helping him to his feet. From this moment on, you are no longer the man you were. Doors will open for you, Nnamdi, but remember, power comes with responsibility. And a price. Before Nnamdi could respond, the door opened, and a man dressed in a dark suit entered. He handed Nnamdi a briefcase and a small card. Your first task, Al-Haji said, nodding toward the items. Complete it, and your journey will continue. Nnamdi opened the briefcase to find stacks of cash and a file containing a photo of a man he didn't recognize. The card bore a single line. Make him disappear. Nnamdi stared at the photograph in the file, his breath catching in his throat. The man's face, though unfamiliar, seemed to mock him from the glossy paper. He looked up at Al-Haji, searching for some kind of explanation, some assurance that this wasn't what it seemed. What does this mean? Nnamdi asked, his voice trembling. Al-Haji regarded him coolly. It means what it says, Nnamdi. Your first task is to remove this man from the equation, permanently. Nnamdi's stomach churned. You can't be serious, I'm not a killer. Al-Haji sighed as if disappointed. You misunderstand, my boy. This isn't about violence, it's about resolve. The man in that file is an obstacle, standing in the way of your success. Whether you choose to eliminate him through negotiation, coercion, or other means is entirely up to you. But he must disappear. Nnamdi felt the weight of the briefcase in his hand, the stacks of cash inside like bricks pulling him down. Why him? What did he do? Al-Haji's eyes narrowed. Do you think greatness comes without sacrifice? Without difficult decisions? This man has what you need. Control of a key contract, one that could launch your business into the stratosphere. Either you take it from him or someone else will take it from you. The choice is yours. Nnamdi's head spun. He wanted to scream, to throw the briefcase back at Al-Haji and walk away. But he knew he couldn't. He had already drunk from the chalice, already stepped into this world. There was no going back. "What happens if I fail?" he asked quietly. Al-Haji's smile was chilling. "Failure is not an option." The next day, Nnamdi sat in his tiny apartment, the files spread out on the table before him. The man's name was Chike Nwankwo, a mid-level contractor who had recently secured a deal with a major agro-industrial firm. According to the file, Chike was married with 2 children and lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town. Nnamdi felt sick just reading it. He couldn't imagine ruining another man's life, let alone ending it. But as he looked around his cramped living space, the peeling paint, the leaking ceiling, he felt the weight of his own desperation. He picked up his phone and dialed the number in the file. It rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. "Hello, this is Chike." Nnamdi's throat tightened. "Mr. Nwankwo, my name is Nnamdi. I'm an entrepreneur, and I've been following your work. I'd love to meet and discuss a potential collaboration." There was a pause. "I'm flattered," Chike said cautiously, "but I'm quite busy at the moment. Maybe another time." "Please," Nnamdi pressed, desperation creeping into his voice. "It won't take long. I think you'll find what I have to offer compelling." After a long silence, Chike relented. "Fine. Meet me at the Greenfield Hotel tomorrow at noon." The next day, Nnamdi arrived early, his nerves frayed. He sat in the hotel cafe, clutching a folder filled with hastily prepared documents meant to impress Chike. When Chike arrived, he was everything the file described: confident, friendly, and sharp. "So, Mr. Nnamdi," Chike said after ordering a coffee, "what's this about?" Nnamdi launched into his pitch, outlining his vision for the agricultural platform and how it could revolutionize the industry. Chike listened politely, nodding occasionally, but his interest waned as the presentation dragged on. "I appreciate your enthusiasm," Chike said finally, "but I'm afraid I can't help you. My commitments are already overwhelming as it is." "Please," Nnamdi said, his voice rising, "just consider it. You have the resources and connections I need. Together we could—" "I said no," Chike interrupted, his tone firm. "Good luck with your project, but I'm afraid this is the end of our discussion." Chike stood, leaving Nnamdi sitting in stunned silence. He watched as Chike walked out of the cafe, the sound of his shoes echoing against the tiled floor. For a moment, Nnamdi considered letting it go, walking away from this insane task. But then he thought of Al-Haji, of the promise of success, of the consequences of failure. His hands clenched into fists. He wouldn't fail. Later that night, Nnamdi found himself parked outside Chike's house, his heart pounding. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he knew he needed leverage, something to force Chike to reconsider. As he sat in the darkness, watching the lights in the house flicker off one by one, a new thought crept into his mind. What if there was no way to persuade Chike? What if the only way forward was to truly make him disappear? The weight of the chalice burned in his memory, a constant reminder of the path he had chosen. He had crossed the first line already. Was it so unthinkable to cross another? Nnamdi sat in his car, his trembling hands clutching the steering wheel. He could feel the heavy weight of his decision bearing down on him, suffocating. Outside, Chike's house stood silent, its lights now completely extinguished. The street was eerily quiet, with only the distant hum of crickets and the occasional bark of a stray dog breaking the silence. He had come here for leverage, but he didn't know what to do. He needed something, anything, that would force Chike's hand. As his thoughts raced, Nnamdi spotted a small detached building at the far corner of the property. It looked like a shed. "Maybe there's something in there," he muttered to himself. He stepped out of the car, his pulse pounding in his ears. He crept toward the shed, staying in the shadows to avoid being seen. The air was thick with tension, each step feeling heavier than the last. When he reached the shed, he tested the door. It was locked. Nnamdi glanced around nervously before pulling out a small pocket knife. He jimmied the lock, his heart thudding as it finally gave way with a soft click. Inside, the shed was cluttered with tools, boxes, and old furniture. A faint beam of moonlight filtered through a cracked window, illuminating the space. Nnamdi rummaged through the boxes, looking for anything he could use. Documents, photos, anything that could give him the upper hand. Finally, he found a small metal box buried beneath some rags. It was locked, but a sense of determination overtook him. He pried it open with his knife, revealing a stack of papers, some cash, and, most intriguingly, a photograph. The photograph showed Chiki standing with a woman who was not his wife. They looked intimate, their hands intertwined, their smiles wide. Nnamdi's mind raced. Was this an affair? Could this be the leverage he needed? He took the photo and a few documents that looked important, carefully placing everything else back as he had found it. With the evidence tucked into his jacket, he locked the shed and slipped back to his car. As he drove away, his hands shook, but a grim sense of satisfaction settled over him. He had something now, something that could force Chiki to listen. The next morning, Nnamdi called Chiki. "Mr. Nwankwo," he began, trying to keep his voice steady, "I think you should reconsider my proposal." Chiki sighed on the other end of the line. "I already told you. I'm not interested. Please stop calling me." Nnamdi took a deep breath. "Are you sure about that? Because I came across something that might change your mind." There was a pause. "What are you talking about?" Nnamdi hesitated, the weight of what he was about to say sinking in. "I have a photo, Chika. A photo of you and someone who isn't your wife. Do you really want me to explain further?" The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Chike spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm giving you an opportunity," Nnamdi said quickly. "An opportunity to help me and yourself. I don't want to use this, Cheek, but you're leaving me no choice." Cheek's breathing grew heavy. "You have no idea what you're getting yourself into." "Maybe not," Nnamdi admitted, "but I do know you wouldn't want this getting out. Let's meet again, tonight, same place." Before Chika could respond, Nnamdi hung up, his hands shaking. That evening, Nnamdi arrived at the Greenfield Hotel once more. Chiki was already there, his face dark with anger. He sat stiffly at the table, his hands clenched into fists. "You've made a big mistake," Chike growled as Nnamdi sat down. "I don't think so," Nnamdi replied, sliding the photo across the table. Cheek snatched it up, his jaw tightening as he looked at it. "Where did you get this?" "Does it matter?" Nnamdi asked. "The point is, I have it, and I can make it disappear if you help me." Cheek's eyes blazed with fury, but there was something else there too, fear. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "I want your contract," Nnamdi said firmly. "Transfer it to me and this photo will never see the light of day." Cheek laughed bitterly. "You think it's that simple? Do you know who I work with? Who I answer to? If I hand over that contract, it won't just be me in trouble, it'll be you too." Nnamdi's confidence faltered. "What do you mean?" Chike leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not the only one with powerful backers, Nnamdi. The people I work with are far more dangerous than you can imagine. If you cross them, you won't just lose everything. You'll lose your life." Nnamdi stared at him, the weight of his words sinking in. Had he bitten off more than he could chew? But then he thought of Alhaji, of the promise of power and success. He couldn't back down now. "I'll take my chances," Nnamdi said quietly. Chike shook his head. "You're making a mistake. But if you're that desperate, fine. I'll give you what you want. But don't say I didn't warn you." As Chiki stood and walked away, Nnamdi felt a hollow victory settle over him. He had won this battle, but at what cost? The next day, Nnamdi waited for Chike to deliver the contract. The weight of the previous night's conversation lingered heavily on his mind. Cheek's warning echoed like a drumbeat in his ears. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Nnamdi brushed off the thought. Success required bold moves and he had already committed. This was no time to retreat. By noon, Chiki called. "Meet me at the abandoned warehouse on Obodo Crescent at 8 p.m. Come alone," Cheek instructed, his voice cold and clipped. The choice of location made Nnamdi uneasy, but he agreed. Hanging up, he reminded himself that this was the moment he'd been waiting for. With this deal sealed, Alhaji would have no reason to doubt him. The meeting. At exactly 8 p.m., Nnamdi arrived at the warehouse. The structure loomed like a skeleton in the moonlight, its broken windows and crumbling walls adding to its menacing aura. Nnamdi stepped inside, the sound of his shoes echoing on the concrete floor. The space was dimly lit by a single hanging bulb, casting long, eerie shadows. Chike stood in the middle of the room, a briefcase in hand. "You came alone?" Chike asked, his eyes scanning the darkness behind Nnamdi. "I did," Nnamdi replied, trying to sound confident. Chike smirked and placed the briefcase on a rickety table. "Inside are the documents you wanted. The contract is yours now." Nnamdi hesitated. It felt too easy. "You seem awfully cooperative all of a sudden," Nnamdi said, narrowing his eyes. "What's the catch?" Chike laughed, a humorless sound that sent chills down Nnamdi's spine. "The catch is, you've just walked into a storm you can't escape. This contract? It's cursed, and now it's your burden to bear." Before Nnamdi could respond, the faint hum of engines surrounded the warehouse. Bright headlights flooded the space, and several SUVs screeched to a stop outside. Nnamdi's heart pounded as men in dark suits poured out, their faces shadowed but their intent clear. "What is this, Chike?" Nnamdi demanded, panic creeping into his voice. "I warned you," Chike replied calmly, stepping back. "The people I work for don't forgive betrayal or weakness." The men entered the warehouse, their leader stepping forward. He was tall, with an air of authority that made the room feel even colder. "So," the man said, his voice deep and commanding, "you're the ambitious one who thinks he can outmaneuver us." Nnamdi tried to speak, but his throat felt dry. The man continued, his gaze piercing. "We've been watching you, Nnamdi. You've shown promise, but your recklessness is a problem. Do you truly understand what you've signed up for?" Nnamdi swallowed hard, his mind racing. Yes. I'm ready to prove myself." The man's lips curved into a cold smile. "Good. Then consider this your initiation." He gestured to one of his men, who opened a large bag, pulling out a blood-stained machete. Nnamdi's stomach turned. "You want power?" the man asked, his voice sharp. "You'll earn it tonight. There's no turning back now." Nnamdi felt trapped, his ambitions now tethering him to an abyss he hadn't foreseen. As the men closed in, the leader handed him the machete. "Your first task," the leader said, pointing to a trembling figure being dragged forward, a blindfolded man, his cries muffled by a gag. Nnamdi froze, the weight of the blade in his hands feeling like the weight of his soul. "Kill him," the leader commanded. I can't," Nnamdi stammered, his heart racing. "Then you're not ready for the life you seek," the leader said coldly. "Make your choice, rise or fall." Nnamdi's mind spiraled. The stakes were higher than he'd ever imagined. The photo he had used to blackmail Chike felt trivial now compared to the darkness standing before him. He looked at the blindfolded man, his conscience screaming for him to run. But Alhaji's voice echoed in his mind. "You must be willing to sacrifice everything for success." Taking a deep breath, Nnamdi tightened his grip on the machete. Nnamdi stood frozen, the machete trembling in his hands. Every instinct screamed for him to drop the blade and run, but fear and ambition locked his feet in place. The blindfolded man whimpered, his muffled cries tearing at what remained of Nnamdi's conscience. The leader's cold voice pierced the silence. "Your hesitation tells me you're weak. Weakness has no place here." Nnamdi glanced at Chike, who stood on the sidelines, watching with a mix of pity and resignation. Suddenly, a thought struck Nnamdi like a bolt of lightning. What if Chike's betrayal wasn't just fear? What if he saw an escape where I didn't? The room seemed to fade as Nnamdi's mind raced. He had come so far, gained so much, but at what cost? Was this truly the life he wanted? A life where power was drenched in blood and freedom came at the expense of his humanity. The leader stepped closer, his patience wearing thin. "Decide now, or you'll join him." Nnamdi's grip on the machete tightened, but instead of raising it, he flung it to the ground with a loud clang. "No," he said firmly, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. I won't do this." The leader's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a sinister smile. "Then you've chosen death." Nnamdi braced himself, his heart pounding as the leader nodded to his men. But before they could move, Chiki suddenly stepped forward. "Enough!" Cheek's voice echoed through the warehouse. He pulled out a device from his pocket and pressed a button. In an instant, sirens blared outside, and red and blue lights illuminated the warehouse. "This is the end of your reign," Cheek said, his voice steady. The leader's face twisted in anger. "You dare betray us?" Cheek smirked. "I've been waiting for this moment. Nnamdi wasn't the only one tired of your games." The doors burst open as a team of police officers stormed in, guns drawn. Chaos erupted as the men in suits scrambled to escape. Nnamdi dropped to the ground, shielding himself as the officers secured the area. The leader lunged at Chike, but an officer tackled him to the ground, slapping handcuffs on his wrists. An hour later, Nnamdi sat in the back of an ambulance, a blanket draped over his shoulders. Chike approached, his face softened by relief. "You set them up," Nnamdi said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Chike nodded. "I had to. I couldn't let them destroy another life." Nnamdi looked down at his hands, trembling, but free of blood. "Why did you help me?" Chike sighed. "Because I saw myself in you. Ambition blinded me once too. I lost everything before I realized power isn't worth your soul." Nnamdi swallowed hard, the weight of his choices sinking in. "What happens now?" Chike smiled faintly. "You start over. Away from them. Away from this darkness. It's not too late to choose a different path." 1 year later, Nnamdi stood outside a newly built school, watching as children ran into the classrooms. He had poured his resources into creating something meaningful, something that didn't demand blood or sacrifice. A familiar voice called out, "Nnamdi!" He turned to see Chike, now a changed man, walking toward him. "They said you couldn't do it," Chike said, gesturing to the school. "But here you are," and Nnamdi smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. "I realize success isn't about taking from others, it's about giving back." As the two men stood there, watching the children laugh and play, Nnamdi felt a peace he had never known. He had chosen the harder path, but it was the right one. In the end, Nnamdi learned that true freedom wasn't found in power or wealth, but in living a life unbound by fear, greed, and guilt, a life where he could finally breathe. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to our channel for more captivating African folk tales. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment below with your thoughts or any stories you'd like to hear next. Your support helps us bring more stories to life. Thank you once again.